Welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking some seriously expansive cosmic lore. We're going to dive right into the core concepts of Ryuho Okawa's texts with a major focus on the Descent of Elohim. Whether you're already familiar with these teachings or hearing about them for the very first time, the narrative we're looking at today is incredibly intricate. It blends ancient space battles, the origins of morality, and a modern spiritual call to action into one massive timeline. Our goal today is to map out this 150 million year history step by step. We want to see exactly how the source connects our deep cosmic past to the intense global crises we're facing right now. Here's what we're covering today. First step, the essential cosmic sequel. Then, Earth's hidden space history, the origins of hell, the teachings of Elohim, and finally, a new Earth genesis. Let's get right into it. Section 1, the essential cosmic sequel, a cinematic key to today's confusion. We really have to start by understanding how the author positions this material, because it's not just presented as a casual history lesson. The texts serve as the foundation for an animated movie adaptation, and the source material, especially in its afterword, is incredibly emphatic about this. It states that following the previous film, The Dawn, this Elohim sequel is an absolute must-see. It's framed as an essential piece of media that you simply cannot afford to miss. Why? Well, according to the text, the answers to our modern planetary chaos, the extreme ideological divides, and global struggles we see on the news every single day are actually locked away in the events of 150 million years ago. To figure out today, the source argues we have to look to the distant stars. Moving on to Section 2, Earth's hidden space history, 150 million years ago. Let's rewind the clock way back. The source outlines that the overarching Earth god hasn't just been sitting back watching. They've physically descended to guide the planet during critical moments. This timeline shows three distinct eras. First, 330 million years ago as the god Alpha. Then, our primary focus today, 150 million years ago as Elohim. And finally, right now in our modern era, the 21st century descent as El Cantare. This reoccurring cycle of divine intervention is the structural backbone of the entire narrative. So, what on earth, literally, was going on 150 million years ago that required Elohim to step in? The text describes Earth back then not as a primitive wasteland, but as a vibrant, complex, cosmic melting pot. You had extraterrestrial visitors from various star systems integrating with Earth's environment, plus the diversification of reptilian species. But, with so many totally different alien cultures, technologies, and philosophies cramming onto one planet, friction was basically inevitable. The source explains that these fundamental differences in values, like how to live, what to prioritize, eventually sparked a massive cosmic conflict right here in our solar system. To make sense of this conflict, the text breaks the participants down into distinct factions. On one side, you've got the invading or destructive forces, mostly linked to star systems like Magellan and Centaurus. On the flip side, stepping up as the Earth defenders, were forces from Pleiades and Vega. The text portrays this as a literal space war, fought over the very future of the planet. It wasn't just physical ships blasting each other, it was a huge clash of cosmic ideologies. But before we delve into the spiritual fallout of these massive space wars, the source material throws in a truly surprising detail. A fascinating pop culture crossover that you definitely wouldn't expect to see in a book about ancient cosmic theology. Seriously, what does comic book legend Stan Lee have to do with this? Well, the text actually includes a transcribed spiritual interview with the guardian spirit of Stan Lee. And his spirit makes some pretty incredible claims about his past lives. He says that in the ancient days of Earth, he wasn't just the biblical figure Abraham, he was also a creator god in Japan. As he says in the quote, he claims to have been the god of volcanoes, who helped design the Japanese islands, specifically calling himself the god of Mount Fuji. It's a really striking moment that shows how the author weaves recognizable modern icons into this vast ancient mythology. It really keeps you on your toes. Section 3. The origins of hell, the birth of the underworld. So, what happens after a massive interstellar war on Earth? According to the source, it led directly to the origins of hell. But here's the crucial point. In this lore, hell wasn't created on purpose as some fiery torture chamber right from the start. Instead, the text argues that the creation of hell was actually a direct consequence of free will and diversity. Because Earth was hosting humans and extraterrestrials with wildly different ways of thinking, some constructive, some incredibly destructive, a natural boundary just began to form in the spirit world. Basically, when you allow diversity of thought, you inevitably allow for negative, harmful thoughts too. Because of all this, the source defines hell as a necessary lower spirit realm. As these various cosmic entities made destructive choices during and after the space wars, they started losing what the text calls their qualifications as children of God. They simply couldn't comfortably exist in the higher, harmonious realms anymore. So this lower dimensional space naturally emerged to accommodate those fallen values. It was essentially a spiritual side effect of a very, very chaotic era. Section 4. The Teachings of Elohim, Establishing Good and Evil. This suddenly emergent lower realm created an absolute existential crisis for the planet. A divine intervention was required to set things straight. So, to combat the hellish values spreading across Earth, the god Elohim descended. The primary mission here? To establish a stark, undeniable standard of right and wrong. The text heavily emphasizes this duality. Elohim drew a hard line, contrasting light, goodness, and heaven against darkness, evil, and the newly formed hell. It was all about creating a definitive moral compass for a planet that was totally lost in a gray area of cosmic diversity gone wrong. In fact, the source points out that the very name Elohim translates to light or God's light. The entire core of Elohim's teaching was exactly that, shining a light of justice, compassion, and faith to cut right through the darkness. It was meant to guide people, both the native humans and the alien immigrants, back to the right path. Ultimately, Elohim is described as a protector. By establishing the absolute value of justice and teaching a strict difference between good and evil, Elohim basically fortified the planet. The text asserts this wasn't just philosophical, it was an active spiritual defense against those malignant, invading cosmic forces we talked about earlier. By defining these spiritual laws, Elohim created a much-needed pathway, a literal lifeline, connecting the Earth back to the heavenly realms. Which brings us to Section 5, A New Earth Genesis, the 21st Century and El Cantare. So how does this 150-million-year-old story apply to us right now? The author strongly insists that this history is absolutely not just in the past. To solve today's global confusion, the wars, the political strife, the polarization, the world absolutely must know the truth of this Genesis god, Elohim. The text argues that humanity has forgotten that crucial dividing line between good and evil, heaven and hell, that was established way back then. Remembering it is presented as the only way to navigate the chaos of the modern world. In a really critical excerpt from the book's Afterword, the author drops a massive revelation. Because the world is in such disarray, the Earth God has descended for a third time. The source states that we are currently living in the era of this third descent, with the guiding consciousness now known as El Cantare. The text is super clear about this. This information needs to be known globally because it marks the dawn of a completely new era for humanity. The teachings being delivered today are described as the Law of El Cantare. According to the text, this law is the righteous path forward. It represents a brand new Genesis for Earth, picking up right where Elohim left off. But it goes a step further. The source states these teachings are specifically designed to be the path that safely opens the door to our impending space age. It's all about preparing humanity spiritually before we physically venture back out into the cosmos, where this all began. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought, based on the source material we've explored today. As we stand on the brink of our own space age, facing immense global challenges, the text asks us to look back in order to look forward. Will humanity embrace this proposed new cosmic genesis, or are we destined to just repeat the chaotic interstellar mistakes of 150 million years ago? It's a massive, sweeping narrative that for sure gives you a totally different lens to view our place in the universe. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and hey, keep questioning the cosmos. Welcome back to the explainer. Today, we're diving straight into an incredibly epic, deeply detailed cosmological saga presented in the source text, The Descent of Elohim. We're going to map out a narrative that winds the clock back a staggering 150 million years. It's this wild blend of heavy sci-fi world-building mixed with deep spiritual philosophy. So if you're ready to explore ancient Earth defense forces, interstellar warfare, and the literal origins of cosmic morality, you are absolutely in the right place. Let's get into it. Here is how we're breaking this all down today. First up, the ancient chaos setting. Then Elohim's descent. Third, the sci-fi world building. Fourth, the cosmic war. And finally, the underlying spiritual philosophy. Starting off with Section 1, this setting, ancient chaos. Okay, think about standard archaeology for a second. Mainstream science generally places modern human ancestors somewhere around 30 to 50,000 years ago, right? And the earliest hominid fossils, maybe around 5 million years ago. But this narrative, it asks us to go back way, way further, an incredible 150 million years. This massive timeframe is absolutely crucial because it establishes the sheer, incomprehensible scale of the mythology we're about to unpack. Now picture an absolute physical nightmare. According to the cosmology, this 150-million-year-old Earth was a wildly hostile place. We're talking a planet overrun by giant, hyper-aggressive reptilian species, basically dinosaurs on steroids, and the early progenitors of humanity at this time, the text describes them as resembling demons or ogres, who basically survived by ruthlessly sacrificing each other. You add in highly active volcanoes spewing toxic sulfur gases everywhere, and you have utter chaos. But here's the really important part. Because of all this unruliness and a spike in fearful, unredeemed spirits, this era triggered the initial emergence of a lower spirit realm, essentially the beginnings of hell. And you can actually see this intense environmental setting woven directly into the book's structure. The table of contents explicitly lays out this divine descent onto a 150-million-year-old Earth, making a direct link between the physical chaos on the ground and this massive spiritual crisis of a developing hell. Which brings us to Section 2, the protagonist, Elohim's descent. So who steps into this literal toxic wasteland? Elohim. In this spiritual doctrine, Elohim isn't just some passing visitor. He is one of the core consciousnesses of the earth god, El Cantare, and he descends specifically into the region we now know as the Middle East. His primary mission was huge. He needed to guide humanity away from their chaotic, demon-like survival instincts. He had to give them the wisdom to actually overcome their primal fears, fundamentally teaching them the difference between light and dark, between good and evil. The source text is super clear about this connection, linking Elohim directly back to Cantare. It frames this entire descent as an emergency rescue mission for a planet that was, frankly, spiritually failing. Moving right along to Section 3, Sci-Fi World Building Survival and Adaptations. This is where the text gets incredibly cool. What elevates this from your standard spiritual narrative is the heavy science fiction world building. These extraterrestrial beings didn't just rely on good vibes to survive this toxic environment. They wore specialized hazmat gear and spacesuits. They utilized advanced cyborg technology to artificially adapt their physical bodies to the planet's extremes. They literally constructed massive 50 to 100-meter tall pyramid fortresses just to keep those giant beasts out. It paints this incredibly vivid, gritty picture of planetary colonization. Get this. Even Elohim himself is described with these wild, physical, sci-fi attributes. His normal, baseline form is described as being about 3 meters tall. That's almost 10 feet, which is already huge. But the text states that during extreme combat, he could mechanically expand his physical body up to a towering 20-meter giant. And it gets crazier. During these intense battles, Elohim uses something called the third eye on his forehead. But the source describes this way less like a glowing mystical symbol and much more like advanced biological or cybernetic tech. When he opens it, it grants advanced night vision, sensory capabilities, it emits these powerful, destructive ultrasonic waves, and it even has mind control abilities strong enough to manipulate hostile, giant creatures. Reading through these passages, it is abundantly clear we're not dealing with abstract spiritual metaphors here. This is tactical warfare, using biological weaponry and size-shifting combat forms. And trust me, they needed all of it, because this whole narrative centers around a massive cosmic war fought right over the Earth. That takes us to Section 4, the Cosmic War, Invaders versus Defenders. So who exactly is fighting who? The lore sets up the factions very clearly. On one side, you've got the invaders. These are aggressive forces primarily from the Magellan and Centaurus star systems, and their goal was straightforward, the subjugation or total destruction of Earth. Standing in their way are the defenders. This group included native Earth defense forces who were actually backed up by the 3 volunteer armies from places like the Pleiades, who were described as lovers of beauty and harmony, and the Vega civilization. You can see right in the text that whole sections of the book are dedicated to this space war. It details a full-scale intergalactic planetary defense operation where these highly advanced civilizations actually step in to volunteer their armies. The scale is just massive. It even throws Andromeda genetics into the mix, mentioning that warriors possessing specific traits from the Andromeda galaxy participated heavily in these defense battles. It intricately weaves together all these different galactic lineages, each bringing their own unique tech and combat styles to protect this ancient Earth. And the author really leans into contrasting these groups. You have the Magellan invaders using highly aggressive, destructive tactics, directly clashing with the more harmonious, cooperative, defensive strategies of the volunteer armies. Okay, so we've covered the giant reptilians, the cyborg tech, and the space wars. Now we need to anchor all these sci-fi elements back to the actual philosophy of the text.
Section 5, the spiritual philosophy.
Why did all this warfare even happen? Well, the text posits this overarching spiritual rule. The universe actually naturally permits a certain percentage of destruction, or an idea of evil, to exist. It's a mechanism for trial and growth. But, and this is a huge but, the absolute paramount duty of beings like Elohim is ensuring that the balance of good and evil is protected. That cosmic war was fundamentally about restoring that tipping balance. Elohim basically had to lay down the ethical foundation for a brand new world. He taught primitive humanity the literal distinction between light and dark. By giving them the wisdom to overcome their primal fears, he helps them evolve out of that chaotic survival state into a society with actual moral values. What's more, this ancient war set a permanent precedent. It taught that fighting to protect spiritual values is sometimes absolutely necessary, which introduced the very prototype of self-sacrifice. Okay, and here is where the lore drops a massive twist. The text connects these ancient extraterrestrial battles directly to the much, much later earthly arrival of Jesus. It frames this 150-million-year-old space war and the volunteer aliens who died defending the planet as the spiritual prototype for the concept of martyrdom and self-sacrifice that later defined so much of human history. So, to wrap up this explainer, I really want you to think about this. Consider how this unique cosmology takes the massive, imaginative vastness of science fiction, giant aliens, interstellar wars, cyborgs, and uses it to answer the most deeply human questions about morality, the necessity of evil, and the ultimate value of self-sacrifice. It challenges us to view earthly spiritual history not just as a local human event, but as one crucial chapter in a sprawling universal saga. Thanks so much for joining me to break down this fascinating text. See you next time. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a truly mind-bending spiritual text that outlines a massive cosmic history dating back over 150 million years. Whether you view this as profound theology or just an epic narrative, the concepts it lays out about the origins of humanity and the hidden spiritual battles shaping our reality are absolutely fascinating. We're unpacking a text called The Descent of Elohim. And let me tell you, the history it presents for our planet is way more complex and honestly a lot more perilous than anything you'd find in a standard history book. It challenges the conventional timeline by introducing a universe packed with spiritual forces and ancient decisions that are still impacting us right now. To get our heads around this expansive chronology, we're going to break it down into 5 quick parts: the high-risk civilization experiment, materialism and hell's origins, the fall of Lucifer, cosmic souls in conflict, and finally, warnings for modern times. Let's get into it. Section 1. The high-risk civilization experiment. So the text draws this massive contrast between two completely different realms. On one hand, you've got the high spirit world. Think pure thought, blinding light, and ultimate faith. But then, on the other hand, you have the early 3-dimensional physical world of Earth. At this time, Earth was completely primitive and frankly brutal. It was an environment that was totally alien to highly evolved spiritual beings. Which brings us to a huge risk. The text specifically notes that the possibility of the soul degrading spiritually was extremely high. And it makes sense, right? Dropping from a pure spiritual plane to a heavy, primitive physical body was incredibly dangerous. Early Earth was all about brutal survival, almost like wild animals. So souls thrust into this chaos were in constant danger of just losing their spiritual awareness altogether. That's exactly why living on Earth was explicitly set up as a civilization experiment. It was the ultimate test. Could spiritual beings adapt to a dense 3D world but still keep that divine connection? Well, for a lot of them, the everyday struggle just to survive physically totally overshadowed their spiritual roots. They started believing that this physical world was literally all that existed.
Which leads us right into section 2, materialism and hell's origins.
This is where we hit the trap of materialism. The text explains that as these souls ground out their difficult physical lives, a lot of them just stopped believing in God or the invisible spirit world entirely. They bought into the idea that this world is all there is. And the tragic result? When they eventually died, they had fundamentally forgotten how to return to the heavenly realms. Without faith, their souls had basically become too heavy. And here is one of the most fascinating concepts in the entire text. Hell wasn't some punishment created by God, it actually formed organically. These lost materialistic souls couldn't ascend, so they just lingered, wandering the Earth's surface. Eventually, to hide from the brilliant light of the heavens, they literally started digging into the earth like moles. They built these hidden underground dwellings which slowly expanded into the hell realm we know today. And that sets the stage for section 3, the fall of Lucifer. These verses from a section called The Theme of the Fallen Angel lay out an incredibly tragic story. According to the text, Lucifer wasn't created as a demon. He was actually one of the absolute greatest archangels. In fact, he was the twin brother of the archangel Michael, but he let himself be consumed by this intense jealousy toward God, ultimately demanding to be worshipped as the ultimate creator himself. So, roughly 120 million years ago, this magnificent being, known as the Son of Dawn, let his worldly desires take over completely. He clashed with heavenly authority and was actually struck down by Michael's sword. Defeated, he fell to earth like lightning. And those lost underground souls we just talked about, they looked up to him, and he took over, officially establishing and ruling this newly formed hell. Section 4, Cosmic Souls in Conflict. To really grasp this spiritual war, we need to look at 3 clear ideological archetypes. First, you have Amor, who is all about the pursuit of love, nonviolence, and embracing diversity. Then you have Michael, whose domain is combat and the strict realization of justice. And opposing them both is Lucifer, driven by what the text describes as a massively hypertrophied self-love and a complete obsession with supremacy. The text uses this brilliant analogy to contrast the two brothers. Michael is like the sun. He generates his own light and gives it freely to others. Lucifer, though, is compared to the moon. Sure, he was undeniably brilliant, but he only shined by reflecting the light given to him. The moment he tried to artificially inflate his own ego and shine without that divine source, he inevitably plunged into darkness. But wait, it gets even wilder, because this isn't just an earthly conflict, it's totally cosmic. The text points out that remnants of ancient space wars, involving the Magellan and Centaur systems, actually created wormholes directly to Earth's hell. These are controlled by malicious extraterrestrials, which is exactly why angels of light have to constantly incarnate here to keep purifying the world. Plus, you had souls migrating from the Vega system bringing this extreme adaptability, but also a stubbornness that sometimes messed with the diverse harmony Earth was trying to cultivate. So we've got this massive 150 million year timeline, an organically grown hell, fallen angels, and alien wormholes. But what does this all actually mean for us today? Why should we care about this ancient spiritual battle right now? That brings us to our final part, Section 5, Warnings for Modern Times. The text makes a really sharp critique of our current world. It argues that despite all our amazing technology and scientific breakthroughs, modern humans are suffering from a massive impoverishment of spiritual imagination. We're living in this era of what it calls godless democracy and freedom, where the invisible realms are just completely ignored, all for the sake of sheer material progress. And it highlights a huge danger here. Even when people today do get into spirituality, they often just treat it like a force, a tool for willpower, like trying to manifest success, completely lacking any true depth or reverence for the divine. The text is urging us to learn from the tragic falls of past civilizations like Mu and Atlantis. If we forget God and rely solely on materialism, we're walking right into the exact same trap that originally filled the underworld. As we keep navigating our own modern civilization experiment, this explainer leaves us with a pretty heavy choice. Are we going to actively remember our spiritual origins and choose the light of faith? Or are we doomed to let the heavy isolation of materialism pull us right back into the dark cycle of the fallen angels? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.
Movie soundtracks are usually just mood setters. But today, we're diving into an explainer on Chapter 3 of our source material. We're going to see how the original songs, specifically the lyrics written and composed by Ryuho Okawa, literally construct the massive universe of the laws of the universe, the Age of Elohim. Here, the music isn't just background noise, it is the actual blueprint.
The source text actually describes these lyrics as words of enlightenment and beautiful vibrations from the heavenly realm. So we're not just talking about some catchy tunes here. These songs are the foundational pillars. They completely dictate the spiritual worldview and establish the rules of this universe before you even see a single frame of animation.
And there's this really fascinating editor's note that reveals the timeline. These original songs were created prior to the film's production. Think about that for a second. The music came first. They were engineered specifically to encode the central ideologies, the deep character psychology, and the boundless compassion of the Elohim universe right from the start.
Okay, so let's jump right into Layer 1, the divine mission.
Looking at this from a macro universe perspective, Elohim's theme is what establishes our overarching cosmic themes. The lyrics say, Elohim, beyond all races and skin colors, to make it a planet of love, you devoted everything. The text is framing Elohim not just as some distant, detached creator, but as the ultimate, unifying force for the entire earth.
And this really illustrates the true depth of that commitment. The source establishes Elohim as the very source of love, vowing to never abandon the earth, even if it turns into a valley of suffering. This isn't conditional love, you know? It encodes a lore of absolute, unyielding divine protection.
The really crucial takeaway from this macro level is a profound philosophical argument. It tells us that true justice lies way beyond mere good and evil. It's proposing that through love, humanity can actually understand God and see a higher, much more complete form of justice.
Moving right along to Layer 2, the warrior's resolve.
Now we're shifting our focus from that macro divine level down to the individual warriors on the ground. Pangol's theme offers this really unique facet of justice. The lyrics declare, being a woman is not a weakness, love and courage surging through my whole body. It portrays a deeply internal, maternal kind of strength that's fueled by an intense desire to protect.
Notice the textual command here for Pangol to literally strengthen her heart and fight against universal evil. The song roots her formidable power in compassionate defense. Basically, her strength isn't about aggression at all. It's completely about an unbreakable inner fortitude and the will to shield others.
But then we get a massive, massive contrast with Yazel's theme. It goes, invincible on the ground, but once you take off into the sky, you are also invincible on the sky. Unlike Pangol's internal resolve, Yazel's campaign song is just explosive. It's entirely externally focused and absolutely dripping with this overwhelming, invincible combat energy. These lyrics create such a fascinating duality in the lore's approach to defense. On one side, we have Pangol's emotional shielding and internal courage. And on the exact opposite side, we have Yazel's aggressive external dominance, literally smashing all evils, demons, and space aliens. The universe absolutely requires both of these forms of justice to survive. Next up is Layer 3, Sacrifice and Rebellion.
Diving into the absolute deepest spiritual layer of the lyrics, the image song The Beginning Jesus explores a super heavy thematic principle, the idea that the material world is an illusion. The song explicitly states that earthly defeats are just temporary, and that worldly status, honor, or wealth, none of that can follow a soul into the next world. The lyrics sum it up perfectly by saying, discarding everything means gaining everything. The source material uses this song to frame sacrifice not as some tragic loss, but as the ultimate spiritual victory. In this lore, letting go of the material world is literally the foundation of realizing divine love. But, as we know, every great universe has its light, and it also has its dark. So we pivot to the tragic counter-narrative presented in the fallen angel's theme. This illustrates the catastrophic dark side of spiritual ambition when it entirely loses sight of divine love. The source recounts the story of a beautiful youth who became completely blinded by God's glory. This character attempted a revolution because they fundamentally misunderstood the divine intention. They were seeking status and power, which directly contradicts that whole lesson of sacrifice we were just talking about. And the emotional fallout of that rebellion is incredibly profound. The text says, faith must overcome family bonds. This is the deeply heartbreaking core of these lyrics. It depicts a scenario where a twin soul must painfully sever familial ties and literally wield a sword against a brother to protect true faith. The world building here is just incredibly personal and raw.
Bringing it all together now, in Section 4, the structural pillars of the narrative. So we have the divine philosophy set by Elohim at the very top. Then the facets of justice embodied by Pangol and Yaziel. And finally, the spiritual duality of sacrifice versus ambition, seen through Jesus and the fallen angel. It becomes so clear that these distinct lyrical themes are like interlocking puzzle pieces. They serve as the literal textual blueprints of the story's worldview.
So it leaves us asking, how does embedding core spiritual philosophies within music actually change the way we internalize a story's ultimate message? When the very rules of a universe are sung to us rather than just spoken, it bypasses the logical brain and hits straight at our emotions. It's an absolutely powerful tool for world building. Thanks so much for joining me on this explanator, and keep questioning the worlds built around you.